be studying three special types of parallelograms: rectangles, rhombi, and squares. Okay, let me say that again. We are going to study three special types of parallelograms: rectangles, rhombi, and squares. There are 5 theorems in this lesson. However, we will not be looking at these as theorems. I'm going to give these to you in a different form. Okay? We will also have 3 definitions today that you will be responsible for. Your heading for today is rectangles, rhombi, and squares. Lesson 6.5. Now let me say this right off the bat. The word rhombus is singular. Now, nowadays, actually, it is acceptable to say rhombuses, okay? But it's also acceptable to say rhombi for plural. So rhombi is plural for rhombus, okay? So your heading today is rectangles, plural, rhombi, plural, and squares, plural, okay? The lesson number is 6.5, and be sure and include today's date, okay? Be sure and include today's date. Alright, let's continue on. Now, obviously, if we are going to look at these 3 special parallelograms, we need to start off with 3 definitions, okay? 3 definitions. So here they are. You are responsible for these, so please write these down. If I go too fast, just pause the video. Here we go. Number 1, what is a rectangle? A rectangle is a parallelogram. Stop right there. Notice I did not say a quadrilateral. Now, is a rectangle a quadrilateral? Yes, it is. But more specifically, it is a parallelogram, okay? All 3 of these are parallelograms, okay? All 3 of them. A rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. A parallelogram with 4 right angles. So all that you need for a rectangle is 4 right angles. That's it. So, copy this definition down, please. This would be a rectangle. But you know what else would be a rectangle? This would be a rectangle right here. A square is also a rectangle. How do I know that? Because it's a parallelogram, and you have how many right angles? 4 right angles. Okay? So in order to have a rectangle, all that you need is this: a parallelogram with 4 right angles. You need to know that. Okay, moving on. What is a rhombus? It is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. Please copy this down. I'll wait a second for you to do that. Please copy that down. A parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. So students, this is a rhombus. If you want to write these down, you can. You don't have to. It's up to you. That would be a rhombus because it's a parallelogram. And let's pretend all of these sides have a length of 5. There we go. That's a rhombus. But what else would be a rhombus? A square. A square has 4 congruent sides, and it's a parallelogram. Okay? So we're learning something here about squares, okay? A rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. A rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. Got it? Okay, let's move on. Next definition. Copy this down, please. A square is a parallelogram with 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides. It has to have both, okay? A square is a parallelogram with 4 right angles and 4 congruent sides, okay? It has to have both. So here's a square. Well, it's not a very pretty square, but you get the point. Actually, it's a pretty bad square, but and lest you guys feel like you're going back to daycare or kindergarten and learning about rectangles, rhombi, and squares, remember guys, we're going to study these in a detailed way, okay? And it's very important that you know these definitions and you know the difference between these, okay? So here's a square. Notice we have 4 right angles. And we also have 4 congruent sides. So we have a square, okay? Now, this down right now. Everybody listen, and please copy this down. Everybody listen and copy this down. Let's nail down one thing right now, once and for all, so there's no confusion. Okay? Hopefully I've got everybody's attention. A square is a rhombus because a square has four congruent sides. And what do you need for a rhombus? Four congruent sides. A square is a rectangle because a square has what? Four right angles. And what do you need for what do you need to have a rectangle? Four right angles. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So one more time. A square. When you have a square, you will also have a what? A rhombus. And when you have a square, what else will you have? A rectangle. So when I give you a square, you could also call it a square. But you could also call it a what? A rhombus. And you could also call it a what? A rectangle. Okay? Now, I might confuse you here, but listen. Look. I would encourage you to write this down, but you don't have to. It's up to you, okay? If I have a rhombus, it might or might not be a square, okay? But if I have a square, I definitely have a rhombus also, okay? Let me say that again. If I have a rhombus, it might or might not be a square. But if I have a square, I have a rhombus also, okay? All right, moving on. Also, if I have a rectangle, it might or might not be a square. But if I have a square, it is a rectangle. I would write that down, but it's up to you. If I have a rectangle, it might or might not be a square. Could be, might not be. But if I have a square, I definitely have a rectangle also. Okay? Very important. Okay, students, let's continue on now. It is very important that you understand all of what I just said. Please know that. Okay? Now, continuing on, let's get into the information that was originally written as theorems in the book. Okay? But we're going to look at it a little differently. So here we go. I want you to write down 3 characteristics of a rhombus and square. Okay? These 3 characteristics are for a rhombus. So they're also for a square, because when you have a square, you have a rhombus. So I want you to write this down, please. 3 characteristics of a rhombus and square. Here we go. Characteristic number 1. Diagonals are perpendicular. So if I have a square and I draw the diagonals, you're guaranteed there's a what angle right here? A right angle. You might want to write that down. If I have a rhombus like this, and I draw the diagonals like this, you are guaranteed you have a what angle right here? 90 degrees. So all 4 of these angles are 90 degrees. All 4 of these angles are 90 degrees. That's characteristic number 1. Got it? If I'm going too fast, just pause the video. Okay, moving on. Characteristic number 2. Diagonals bisect angles. So, if I have a square, and I have a diagonal like this, you're guaranteed this angle here is congruent to this angle here. In fact, you know the measurement, because remember, a square has a what angle here? 90 degrees. So whenever you have a diagonal in a square, you know for sure this angle is what? 45. And this angle is what? 45. Same thing down here. Same thing down here. Draw another diagonal. Same thing here, 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 here. Now, if I have a rhombus, now remember, in a rhombus, I do not have 90-degree angles right here, okay? So I don't know what the angle is, but I know this. If I draw a diagonal like this, watch carefully. You might want to write this down, guys. Any of these figures I'm putting up here, you might want to write down. It's up to you. This angle here is congruent to this angle here, okay? Anytime you have a diagonal in a rhombus, it bisects the angles. This angle here is congruent to this angle over here. And the same thing down here, and the same thing over here. Okay? Look that over. Make sure you understand it. Diagonals bisect angles. Now, characteristic number 3 for rhombi and squares. congruent sides, and we knew that already. I'm not going to draw you any pictures. That's obvious. A rhombus has 4 congruent sides. A square has 4 congruent sides. Now, I want you to write this down. Write down 3 ways to prove that a quadrilateral is a rhombus or square. I like the word quad. It makes me feel so cool. Okay? Just kidding. Quad. So 3 ways to prove that a quad is a rhombus or square. Write that down, please. Three ways to prove that a quadrilateral is a rhombus or square. You know what the 3 ways are? Some of you probably figured it out. It's these 3 things right here. If the diagonals are perpendicular, if the diagonals bisect angles, if you have 4 congruent sides. Here we go. Okay guys, I'm back, and I paused the video because it dawned on me I made a mistake. There's one thing I want to change here, and of course I apologize for this, but the word square should not be here. Okay, and here's why. Just because the diagonals are perpendicular doesn't mean you're going to have a square. It might be a rhombus or a square. And if it's a square, it's definitely a rhombus. Okay, but this is incorrect, so fix that real quick, please. And I apologize. These are 3 ways to prove that a quadrilateral is a rhombus, not a square. Now remember, you might have a square, but you can't say that for sure based on these 3 things I'm about ready to show you, okay? And I apologize. And here we go. 3 ways to prove that a quadrilateral is a rhombus. Here we go. Number 1, if the diagonals bisect each other, okay? So if you have a quadrilateral like this, and I don't know why I put that. That's not right. I'm having a great day today. Guys, fix this. Man alive. You can tell I made this video late after the basketball game. If the diagonals are perpendicular. Okay, fix that please. Thank you. Okay, moving on. Okay, so the first way to prove that a quadrilateral is a rhombus is if the diagonals are perpendicular. So if you have a quadrilateral and you have diagonals like this, and you notice you have a right angle right here, then you know for sure you have a what? A rhombus. Now, could it be a square? Maybe, but you don't know for sure, okay? So if you have a quadrilateral that looks like this, and you have 2 diagonals drawn, and you notice you have a right angle right here, then you know for sure you have a rhombus. So the first way to prove that a quadrilateral is a rhombus is if the diagonals are perpendicular. Number 2, if the diagonals bisect angles. Okay, so copy that down, please. Copy all this down. So if you have a quadrilateral like this, and you have a diagonal like this, and you notice that all of the angles here are congruent to each other like this. In other words, all of the angles are cut in half. Then you know that you have a rhombus. Now it might be a square, but it's definitely a rhombus. So if you have a figure that looks like this, and you notice that your diagonals are cutting these angles in half like this. Now it would have to be all 4 angles have to be bisected. But if you notice that the diagonals are bisecting the angles, then you know that you have a rhombus for sure. Okay? And number 3, if you have 4 congruent sides, then you have a rhombus. Now it might be a square, but you know for sure that it's a rhombus. So if I give you a quadrilateral and it has 4 congruent sides, you know right away you have a rhombus. Okay? Alright, moving on. We're almost done, guys. This is a very short video. Okay? 2 characteristics of a rectangle and square. Okay? 2 characteristics of a rectangle and square. Here they are. Diagonals are congruent. So listen, guys. If you have a rectangle, okay, you know for sure the diagonals are congruent. So if this whole length of this line here is 10, then you know this whole length here is 10. That's true for a square too. If you have a square and this rectangle here is 5, and this rectangle here is also 5. So when you have a rectangle or a square, the diagonals are congruent. Please copy this down. Okay, moving on to the second characteristic. You have 4 right angles, okay? 4 right angles. So if you have a rectangle, you know for sure you have 4 right angles, okay? If you have a square, you know for sure you have 4 right angles. That's a characteristic of a rectangle and a square, okay? Pretty simple. Let's go ahead and move on. Now, students, I want us to look at 2 ways to prove that a quadrilateral is a rectangle. So please copy that down. We're going to look at 2 ways to prove that a quadrilateral is a rectangle. Okay? 2 ways to prove that a quadrilateral is a rectangle. So here we go. Number 1, copy this down. If the diagonals are congruent. So if you have a quadrilateral and the diagonals are congruent, okay, then you know you have a rectangle. Now, could it be a square? It might be, but we don't know for sure. But we know for sure that it is a rectangle. So anytime you're given a quadrilateral and the diagonals are congruent, then you know right away you have a rectangle. Okay? Alright, moving on. The second way to prove that a quadrilateral is a rectangle is if there are 4 right angles. So if you are given a quadrilateral and you notice that you have 4 right angles, you know right away you have a what? A rectangle. Now, could it be a square? It could be, yes. We just don't know, okay? It could be, but it might not be. But we know for sure that it's a rectangle. Let me pause, let you guys get caught up, okay? 2 ways to prove that a quadrilateral is a rectangle. If the diagonals are congruent, and if there are 4 right angles, either one of those 2 ways will prove that you have a rectangle. Now, students, you guys know I take my teaching very seriously. Those that have had me in the past know this is true. I'm a pusher. And I try to really give you guys a lot of math and challenge you. But like I've said in the past, when I don't need to teach for a long time, then I'm not going to. Okay? More than notes now, you need to practice what you've been taught. Your homework is very important. Listen, guys, homework in math class is not like homework in any other class, in my opinion. And maybe I'm just kind of prejudiced, but that's how I feel about it. Homework is where you come across problems you need help on, that you need to ask questions on, or watch the help video. Okay? And that's how you grow and learn in math, okay? Some of you turn in homework that's so poorly done. I look at it and I'm like, wow, they're not really learning anything. And others of you, a lot of you do a great job. And homework, whether you like it or not, homework is where you learn. So if you're doing your homework to just get it done, you are missing the boat entirely. However, if you're doing your homework to learn, then you're doing well, okay? You should be learning while you do your homework, alright? Okay, I hope this homework help video, I hope this video has been a help to you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call